Is big consultancy now going for big failure? We talked about consultancy companies in the recent past, and the question is, are we facing a serious problem that is inherently existing in the whole industry? And we're talking about the case of Ernst Young, and especially for our German listeners, no, we are not going to talk about Wirecard only. There are a couple of issues here, and it's not the first consultancy firm we're talking about. So first, let's look into the problems. Ernst Young is one of the biggest consultancy companies we have in the world. It's one of the biggest accountancy companies as well. And they also do accountancy, consulting. They do everything you need as a company to be completely sorted. They can help you with absolutely anything, and they have a lot of expert there. So with one aspect, I want to be crystal clear in the very beginning. I will not answer any email where people say, oh, all these consultants have no clue. That is just plain wrong. Many people at these in these consultancy companies are inherently smart and inherently sharp. They do brilliant work. However, a rising number of them are not up to the standard where the standard should be. And Ernst Young, as one of the biggest consultancy company, does not only have the Wirecard scandal, which is one of the largest scandals in the German-speaking area, with billions and billions of fraud and investigations still ongoing. There's another lawsuit against Ernst Young, a 2.7 billion lawsuit against a former hospital operating company, NMC, where Ernst Young said everything is okay, although there is debt, and then the company went bankrupt afterwards. Probably you heard that before. We had it in the recent past with other consultancy companies who did exactly the same. The problem here is with Ernst Young, the debt they saw as soon as the company went bankrupt into insolvency, the debt was 4 billion higher than stated before. And of course, there was an investigation of the Financial Reporting Council, FRC, and other issues then surfaced as well. Ernst Young had the, in my opinion, quite smart idea to split the business, where they say we're going to split accountancy business and consulting business, so we have no conflict of interest. However, especially when you say you have certain partners who are not a big fan of that, you should have talked to them before you have these plans. There's a rebellion from partners in the US, partner level people in the US. And at the end, Ernst Young recently had to announce that they are not going to split the accountancy and consultancy business, which adds to, let's say, the perception of they do not really want to change. At least that's the perception I get right now. In Germany, by the way, Ernst Young just recently received a 500,000 euro fine from APAS, which is the authority that overlooks all the consultancy companies in accountancy. However, that's not the main point here, because 500,000 euros fine for Ernst Young is basically pocket money. But they are now banned for any new business with any stock exchange or publicly listed company for 2 years. And that's not only a lot of money going away, that's also a massive damage to their reputation for the future. And now we have to see what happened here and how to do it better. So aspect number one is you have an ongoing fight between partners. When you have a proper stakeholder management and you focus on sustainable leadership, people like to work where they are. But at the moment, there are many people, including people who contacted me about this case, including people who work for Ernst Young, including 2 people who emailed from the Ernst Young email address to me, who said, basically, we're sitting here, our partners are arguing, and you just run left, right, depending on which partner is yelling at you. And the perception that people have now, and many of them have now, is that people say, we have partners on a record pay who get paid to argue. Yes, we have some business going on. Most of that is business which comes from certain networks. If not networks, it's personal contacts. We're going to get into that later. And when the stakeholder management fails and sustainable leadership gets thrown out of the window and there's no open communication anymore, there's no chance that you're going to run a public organization or an organization which is perceived by the public eye as highly inefficient still and yet very highly paid. And of course, often people ask me, when you criticize these companies by name, don't you fear that they do not book you for your training, speaking, coaching, consultancy, or whatever else? And I can tell you that especially people who have an interest in a positive change do not behave that way. Of course, you have some people who say, I don't like to be criticized. I'm not working with anyone who criticizes me. And by the way, these people are part of the problem and by no means part of the solution, because these people only want to have it their way and there's no point in working with them anyway. However, I had multiple times where people listened to the podcast and said, I see, even if you didn't mention our name, and some people said even, well, you mentioned our name and our company. Yes, the issue is there. We like to change. Can we work together? So people who have an interest in change contact you about how to do it better, at least when your analysis is at least sort of right that you did in the first place. So the first part of the problem is when partners fight, senior leaders fight over their position, their shares, their say, their ideas. So the whole organization, everyone working there, anyone from staff just says, I'm sitting here basically watching people argue. I don't know what the vision is, what our mission is, what our values are. Basically, the mission is survive the day. And that, of course, harms the organization massively. Second, and that normally follows from the first one, the second problem is business over anything problem. Business over anything means that obvious errors are tolerated. And I give you an example, which I had in my case. Someone who listened to this podcast, and I still thank you very much for sending me the request. Someone said, I'd like to have a workshop about remote work. So after the pandemic, we want to know how to work better in a remote scenario, how to work from home, how to work from anywhere, et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds pretty promising in the email. So we set up a phone call. And in the phone call, one of the senior leaders said, and I quote, and please don't send me emails asking which company it was. I'm not going to disclose. Everything that is sent to me via email is completely and 100% confidential forever. So the person then said, I have an opinion on remote work. However, I'm not a big fan of it. So I would like that you present to people what the value of working on site is, and that remote work basically is just a subsidy which is used when there is no other option. So people see what the value of work on site is, and you tell them how important it is. This, by the way, is called purchasing an opinion. It is pretty common, especially when people call themselves so-called speakers or professional speakers, including very dubious associations in that area. And these people are nothing else than spineless rent-a-mouth people, and there are loads of them in the industry who tell you anything from a stage as long as you pay a fee. Hint, not available here. When there is a scientific evidence, and the scientific evidence I have is from Professor Thiel Neely from Harvard University, who trained me professionally on remote work, as you can see on my LinkedIn with the qualifications I have there. And there is strong scientific evidence what the value of remote work is. However, when you say you have a different opinion, it doesn't sound very smart. And anyone has an opinion on remote work. And in today's times, anyone has an opinion on anything. I give you an example. Just imagine. I sit down with you and I tell you, look, you probably heard that many people say gravity, it's like 9.81 meters per second. That's the speed of gravity when you're in free fall. Sorry, I have a different opinion on that. It's in my opinion, it's 5 meters per second. And of course, you would now say that sounds completely ridiculous. And exactly it does. But that's exactly how you sound when you ignore scientific evidence and you say, hey, I have a different opinion on this and that. First, no one asked you about it. Second, no one gives a flipping flamingo about your opinion when there's scientific evidence. And third, when you have a different opinion, please back it with valid and reliable data. Because then we can talk about what is called peer review. And by the way, once more, science. But no one cares about your opinion when the evidence is strongly going against you. And often when you have this business over anything attitude, there are obvious errors, they are tolerated. Then there are no countermeasures and there are no voices that can be heard who speak up against the misdemeanors and the misbehavior of the people who do these errors. And either there are no voices left because they were speaking up in the past, they weren't heard, and then they left, or you simply told anyone, as soon as you speak up, you will be sidelined, punished, sanctioned, or whatever else. Or you just grew a culture where people say, I gave up. Whatever people say, I do, not my problem, their problem. And this self-referential toxic leadership, where self-referential, by the way, means you say, I'm a leader, here's my opinion is automatically a fact because, I'm a leader, and then you just spread your opinion, which is completely unsubstantiated, on the whole organization, a toxic spread over the whole organization. That can destroy an organization because what you implement by that as well is a command and order culture. You have an opinion becomes fact because you say so. Toxic spread over the whole organization. Anyone who doesn't comply has to leave midterm, long run, some even quicker. So this business over anything attitude harms the organization. There is a certain amount of business where you say, thank you, no, thank you, because you know that it's wrong to do it. And often people say, yeah, it's wrong, but, it's well paid. And that's exactly where values come into play. When you say, I don't care, please do not claim any moral position. And then we get to aspect number 3, which normally includes number 1 and 2 in total: network versus insider deal, nepotism or cronyism. And of course, there is a valid question. Let's say you need someone who does your accountancy because you're a company from a certain size. So you need someone who testifies over your book, gives you some sort of certificate, anything you need to file your papers properly with the financial authorities. And now the question, of course, is how neutral is an accountancy company that gets paid by, drumroll, you? So someone checks your books who gets paid by you. Probably there might be a relationship where you say, well, how neutral can they be? And by the way, here, I very clearly want to say no one here gets bribed. Many of them are very professional. However, when you see some of the errors that came to public in the past, these were obvious errors and they were obviously ignored for unknown reasons. Let's just put it that way, for yet unknown reasons. So as soon as you, and of course, when people say, well, who else should pay the accountancy company? Of course, you pay the accountancy company, but the opinion cannot be included in the pay, which means that every couple of years, and in many companies and in many organizations, industries, and especially in certain countries, that already became the law, that you can only have an accountancy company for 2 or 3 years, not more often. And of course, when you have a network is always good, but a network is based on people who have a certain skill set, probably share a certain mindset, and the skill set and the mindset come together to create value for the organization. But what you often see is not a network. It's nepotism, cronyism, it's birthright privilege, and these people get thrown into business for no particular reason. They simply inherit a certain family heritage, a certain position, a certain social standard that they already have by birthright, and then they just coast off on that. And afterwards, we wonder that things went wrong. Who could possibly have thought that? And that's why you need to rotate people in your organization as well. I give you an example. With my bank, and let's be honest, Niels Brabandt is not the company where you say probably billions and billions of money are going through my accounts. No, but I have a certain person that takes care of me and my bank business. And my bank told me from the very beginning, every 2 years, there will be a new person who has never heard of you, where you have to introduce yourself from scratch. There's a certain level of documentation, who you are, what you do, but every 2 years you get a new person. Why? Because they want to keep it neutral. And although sometimes I sit there and 2 years later I say, okay, here we go again, and I have to tell them everything from the scratch, or nearly everything, I appreciate the neutrality because I want to work with a bank that is safe and sound. And they keep it safe by simply eliminating the nepotism and cronyism by rotating people. And of course, when you say we are a mid-sized business, we cannot rotate people, then you have to take care that people who criticize anything or people who criticize something have a channel where they, for example, can be a whistleblower, provide anonymous feedback, where people can simply say, this goes wrong and we have to investigate it right now. Because one aspect is truly shocking. And of course, let's say things can go wrong. And we all know things can go wrong. But the problem is when something goes wrong, then you probably could expect that people say, hey, it went wrong, and this is what we did to correct it. You expect people to be reasonable. But we have a level of unreasonableness where you honestly think this is beyond comical. I give you an example. At the moment, there's a lawsuit ongoing where the head of KPMG gave a testimony. And of course, when it came to Wirecard, this massive, obvious fraud case, as it looks like at the moment, they, of course, made very negative comments and gave evidence which really didn't go well for Wirecard. And that's perfectly fine. That's the job of KPMG, and that's the job of the head of KPMG to tell the truth in front of court. However, afterwards, KPMG criticized competitors for their practice. If there is any big name and consultancy who has no moral or factual position to do so, is KPMG. How often did we mention KPMG in the last 6 months on this podcast? For obvious criticism that was proven by facts and evidence. So suddenly KPMG steps up and pretends they are the one holding the moral and factual position to tell them what's going right and what's going wrong. That's a joke. It's beyond comical. I could say it's pathetic, but that's just not the kind of words I like to choose. It is just unreasonable. Severely unreasonable. Because especially KPMG had wrongdoing in their books for years and years to come, including their CEO in the UK losing their job. You can hear about all of that in the podcast we did before. Summing all this up, profit overall destroys an organization. Ernst Young was not and will not be the last organization who will get into serious trouble, maybe fail, but in the first place, get into serious trouble for what they've done with their profit overall attitude. And by the way, already some people say there will be job cuts at Ernst Young. And of course, some people say it's not my fault what has been done here, and now I lose my job. And that gives a very negative approach and negative image to the whole world of free enterprise. And we're losing more and more people who say, I go into public service because it might not be the most challenging or the most fascinating thing to do. And by the way, some public service positions are very challenging. I don't want to generalize here. But it might be a very safe job. You might not get the amount of money, but things at least do not go wrong that badly as they did here. Profit overall destroys an organization. And now you have to make a decision. When you see something going wrong in your organization, do you act up on it? Do you call it out? And by the way, I can now understand when you sit here and say, listen, Niels, I have addressed it in my organization 55 times. I got sanctioned. I got punished. I got sidelined. I cannot address it a 56th time. I cannot psychologically handle the pressure anymore. Understandable. Because in some organizations, there are moments where people get punished, sanctioned, sidelined for addressing the right issue. And unfortunately, often these sanctions hit women and minorities over and over and over again. But please then talk to someone who might speak in your name and address the issue. Because as soon as you give up, things will go wrong from there, and it will go horribly wrong. And often, at least at the moment, the people who face the consequences are not the ones who did the error, at least not at the moment. Sometimes you see that someone has to face consequences by themselves, but often, unfortunately, in today's world, they do not. And that, by the way, also has to change. And the problem now is you're sitting here, you're listening to this podcast, and you hear these issues. And then the question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to sit here and say, well, I don't think that's a problem? Or you say, well, it's a small problem, or it's a problem no one can change. It just is how the industry works. Or you say, yeah, there is a problem. Someone should do something. Someone obviously meaning not you. Or you are in the last category where you say, yeah, I will address it. Either by myself or I find someone who helps me addressing it. And these are the people we need right now. Because the question is, do you want to sit there and do nothing? Or do you want to be part of the positive change? Your call. And of course, I published about this, and there are now 3 steps I always recommend at the end of my podcast. First, if you have any aspects which you'd like to talk about, just send me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and then we take it from there. If you have something very specific, training, speaking, coaching, whatever else, just text me, and then we take it from there. But we can also just chat about your issues, questions, or anything you'd like to talk about, nb@nb-networks.com. Step number 2, there's free access to anything I publish every single week. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, when you go on that website, just put your email address in there, expert.nb-networks.com. Then you receive only 1 email per week every Wednesday morning. And it's the email which contains free access to anything I have published. And only via that email, you get free access to absolutely anything. Any other approach, you might end up with a paywall. So expert.nb-networks.com. It's a 100% content ad-free guarantee resource every Wednesday morning. But the most important step is step number 3, because you have to apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive change that you want to see in your organization. I wish you all the best doing so. I'm always happy to help you putting everything in place that you want to put in place with your organization. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.